I stood outside my sister's house watching through the window as my 6-year-old nephew Tyler cried at his birthday party. The other kids were asking where Uncle Graham's special dinosaur cupcakes were. I clutched my phone, staring at the text from my ex-business partner. "Sorry, man, had to take the bakery equipment for debt collection. Your cupcakes are ruined." Inside, my sister Madison was making excuses to disappointed children, while Tyler kept looking toward the door, waiting for his favorite uncle, who promised him the most amazing cupcakes ever made. Let me back up and explain how I became the screw-up standing on that sidewalk. My name is Graham, and 6 months ago I thought I had my life figured out. After my divorce from Jessica last year, I moved back to Cedar Falls, Iowa, the small town where Madison and I grew up. I needed a fresh start, somewhere I could rebuild my confidence and maybe figure out who I was supposed to be at 28 years old. The divorce had crushed me. Not just because Jessica and I couldn't make it work, but because it proved what I'd always suspected about myself. I was really good at starting things, but terrible at finishing them. I'd left my accounting job at Morrison & Associates right before the wedding, convinced I could make it as a freelance financial consultant. That lasted about 8 months before I realized I hated working alone and missed the steady paycheck. When I moved back home, I rented a small apartment above Murphy's hardware store on Main Street. The rent was cheap and old. Mr. Murphy didn't mind that my credit score looked like a battlefield. Madison lived just 10 minutes away with her husband Craig and Tyler, so I got to be the fun uncle who showed up for dinner twice a week and took Tyler to the movies on Saturdays. That's how I discovered my hidden talent. Tyler had been obsessed with dinosaurs since he turned 5, and for his birthday last year I'd attempted to make him a dinosaur cake from a box mix. It was a disaster. The frosting looked like green mud, and my attempt at a brontosaurus resembled a deflated balloon. But Tyler loved it anyway because Uncle Graham had made it special just for him. That night I went home and watched YouTube videos about cake decorating until 3 in the morning. Something about the precision and creativity appealed to me. It was like accounting, but instead of balancing numbers, I was balancing flavors and colors and textures. Within a month, I was making elaborate cupcakes for Madison's book club meetings and Craig's work parties. That's when I met Derek Williamson at the community college. He was taking business classes while I was enrolled in a continuing education program for pastry arts. Derek had this infectious energy and big dreams about opening a catering company. When he saw the photos of my cupcakes on my phone, his eyes lit up like slot machines. "Graham, buddy, you're sitting on a gold mine," he said over coffee at Rosie's Diner. "These look better than anything they sell at the fancy bakery downtown. We could make serious money together." Derek had a way of making everything sound simple and exciting. He'd handle the business side, finding clients and managing finances, while I focused on the creative work. We pooled our savings and rented a small commercial kitchen space in the industrial district. Derek found us a great deal on professional equipment, including a stand mixer that cost more than my car. For 3 months, everything seemed perfect. We called our business Artisan Sweets, and Derek's marketing skills brought in steady orders. I was creating themed cupcakes for baby showers, graduation parties, and corporate events. My specialty became intricate fondant work that made each cupcake look like a tiny sculpture. Tyler had been following my progress with the enthusiasm only a 6-year-old can manage. When his 7th birthday started approaching, he made me promise to create something spectacular. We spent hours looking through dinosaur books, and he finally decided he wanted cupcakes that looked like realistic dinosaurs emerging from chocolate dirt. I spent 3 days planning the design. Each cupcake would have a different dinosaur hand-sculpted from vanilla fondant and painted with edible food coloring. The base would be rich chocolate cake with salted caramel filling, topped with chocolate crumb soil and candy fossils. Tyler had shown the sketches to his entire 1st grade class, and Madison said he'd been counting down the days. That's why I was at the commercial kitchen at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, 3 hours before Tyler's party was scheduled to start. I had my ingredients laid out like surgical instruments, my fondant already colored and ready to sculpt. The first batch of cupcakes was cooling on the rack when I realized something was wrong. The kitchen was too quiet. All of our equipment was gone. I walked through the space in disbelief. Our industrial mixer, the one Derek had gotten such a great deal on, was nowhere to be seen. The specialized decorating tools, the professional oven thermometers, even the storage containers I'd bought with my own money had vanished. The only thing left was a note taped to the wall. "Graham, sorry it had to end this way. Equipment was collateral for business loan. You'll understand when you see the books. Derek." I called Derek's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I called our landlord, Mrs. Patterson, who lived in the apartment above the kitchen space. She answered on the second ring, sounding irritated. "Your partner cleaned everything out around midnight," she said. "Claimed you owed him money and he was taking his equipment. Seemed legitimate since his name was on the lease, too." My hands started shaking as I asked her about the business account. Mrs. Patterson explained that Derek had shown her bank statements proving Graham Hartley owed Artisan Sweets nearly $4,000 in unpaid loans. The equipment seizure was apparently legal collection of collateral. None of it made sense until I called the bank. Our business account, which should have had about $3,000 from recent orders, was completely empty. Not only that, but Derek had taken out a business loan in both our names 3 weeks ago without telling me. According to the loan officer, the money had been withdrawn in cash the same day. I sat in my truck outside the empty kitchen, trying not to panic. Tyler's party started in 2 hours, and I had promised him the most amazing dinosaur cupcakes he'd ever seen. More than that, I'd promised Madison I could handle this responsibility. After months of her worrying about my finances and my future, this was supposed to prove I was finally getting my life together. I drove to 3 different grocery stores hoping to find anything that could substitute for what I'd planned. The first store had a small bakery section with basic cupcakes that looked like they'd been made a week ago. The second store was completely sold out of desserts because of weekend parties and events. The third store had cupcakes, but they were decorated with generic flowers and cost $40 for a dozen. Standing in the checkout line with those pathetic grocery store cupcakes, I felt like the biggest failure in Cedar Falls. Tyler had been telling his friends at school about Uncle Graham's special dinosaur cupcakes for weeks. Madison had been bragging to the other parents about her brother's new business. I was about to disappoint everyone who believed in me. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in months: Jessica. "Graham, I'm in town for a work conference, and I heard through Madison that you started a bakery business. That's wonderful. I was wondering if we could meet up while I'm here." Jessica's voice sounded different, warmer than it had during our last conversation 6 months ago when we'd argued about dividing up our wedding gifts. I explained my situation as quickly as possible, expecting her to make some polite excuse and hang up. Instead, she said something that changed everything. "I've been taking professional baking classes since our divorce. I know this sounds crazy, but I have access to a full demonstration kitchen at the hotel where I'm staying. If you want, I could help you make those cupcakes for Tyler." There was a catch, of course. There always was with Jessica. She needed me to sign the final papers for our house division, something I'd been avoiding for months because it made the divorce feel permanent. But more than that, she needed me to trust her again, which felt impossible after everything we'd been through. "The hotel has a cooking classroom they use for corporate team-building events," she explained. "I'm here for a client presentation, but I don't have to be back until this afternoon. We could make this work, Graham, if you want to try." I looked at the sad grocery store cupcakes in my cart and made a decision that scared me more than Derek's betrayal. Sometimes when you're drowning, you have to grab whatever rope gets thrown to you, even if it's attached to the person who pushed you overboard in the first place. 30 minutes later, I was following Jessica through the marble lobby of the Cedar Falls Marriott, carrying bags of baking supplies we'd hastily gathered from the hotel's catering department. She moved with the same determined efficiency I remembered from our marriage, but something was different about her. The sharp edges I'd grown used to seemed softer, more focused on the task than on proving she was right about everything. The demonstration kitchen is usually booked solid, but there's a gap between the morning team-building session and the afternoon wine tasting, she explained as we took the elevator to the third floor. "We have maybe 4 hours if we're lucky." The kitchen was beautiful, all stainless steel and granite countertops with enough space for 12 people to work comfortably. Jessica had already laid out basic ingredients: flour, sugar, eggs, butter. Professional-grade equipment gleamed under bright fluorescent lights. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. "How did you know I'd need help?" I asked as we started measuring ingredients for chocolate cupcake batter. Jessica paused, her hands stilling over the mixing bowl. "Madison called me last week. She was worried about you, said you seemed stressed about Tyler's party. I didn't think it was my place to interfere, but when I heard about your business partnership..." She trailed off, focusing intently on cracking eggs. "You knew about Derek. I ran a credit check on Artisan Sweets when Madison mentioned your business name. It's a habit from my job checking the financial stability of companies we might work with. Derek Williamson has defaulted on 3 business loans in the past 5 years. I wanted to warn you, but I didn't think you'd listen to advice from your ex-wife." The admission hit me like cold water. Jessica had known Derek was trouble, and I'd been too proud to ask for her perspective. During our marriage, I'd often resented her analytical approach to everything, her need to research and plan and triple-check decisions. Now I realized that instinct might have saved me from months of deception. We fell into a working rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Jessica mixed batters while I focused on the fondant work, creating tiny dinosaur figures that would sit atop each cupcake. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable like I'd expected. Instead, it felt like we were both concentrating on something that mattered. "I started taking baking classes after our divorce," Jessica said quietly, not looking up from the cupcake tins she was filling. "My therapist suggested I needed a creative outlet, something that wasn't about spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Turned out, I actually enjoyed it." I glanced at her hands as she worked. They moved with practiced confidence, portioning batter with professional precision. "You're really good at this. So are you." She gestured toward the fondant dinosaurs I'd been sculpting. Even working quickly, I'd managed to create a tiny triceratops with detailed facial features and textured skin. "I never understood why you wanted to leave accounting for something like this, but I get it now. There's something satisfying about making something beautiful with your hands." For the next hour, we worked mostly in comfortable silence. The cupcakes baked while I crafted a dozen different dinosaurs: a fierce Tyrannosaurus Rex, a long-necked Brontosaurus, a spiky Stegosaurus. Jessica prepared chocolate buttercream frosting and assembled the dirt mixture of crushed chocolate cookies and cocoa powder. I was putting finishing touches on a tiny pterodactyl when Jessica's phone rang. Her face immediately shifted into business mode as she answered. "Mr. Henderson." "I thought our meeting was at 3. What do you mean he's here now?" My stomach dropped as I watched Jessica's expression change from confusion to panic. She covered the phone's mouthpiece and whispered, "My biggest client just flew in early. I have to present our quarterly analysis right now, or I could lose a promotion I've been working toward for 8 months. The choice was obvious, and I told her so. This promotion was important to her career, and Tyler's cupcakes weren't her responsibility. I could figure out how to finish the decorating work myself." "I can't just leave you here," she protested, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. This presentation could change her life, and we both knew it. "Go," I insisted. "You've already saved Tyler's birthday, and I can handle the rest." Jessica hesitated for a moment, then quickly showed me her technique for creating realistic dinosaur skin, using a toothpick to add texture to the fondant. "If anyone asks, you're my colleague using the kitchen for a client project. The hotel staff knows me, so they shouldn't bother you. But Graham, if security comes around and I'm not here to vouch for you..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I'd be kicked out of the hotel with half-finished cupcakes and no way to salvage Tyler's birthday. After Jessica left, the kitchen felt enormous and quiet. I had 12 beautiful chocolate cupcakes cooling on racks and a dozen fondant dinosaurs waiting to be assembled, but I'd never done this final decorating step without Jessica's guidance. My first attempt at placing a dinosaur on its frosted cupcake looked clumsy and amateurish. That's when hotel security arrived. "Excuse me, sir, but we received a complaint about unauthorized use of this kitchen facility," the security guard said. He was polite but firm, clearly prepared to escort me out if I couldn't provide a good explanation. I explained that I was working with Jessica Henderson, who was attending the corporate conference upstairs. The guard checked his list and confirmed that Jessica had permission to use the kitchen, but he couldn't reach her to verify that I was supposed to be there. "I'm going to need you to pack up your materials and leave until Ms. Henderson can confirm your authorization," he said apologetically. Standing there with Tyler's half-finished birthday cupcakes, I felt the familiar weight of failure settling on my shoulders. Even with help, even with a perfect kitchen and professional equipment, I couldn't seem to follow through on a simple promise to a 6-year-old boy. But then, something strange happened. As I started carefully packing the fondant dinosaurs back into their containers, I noticed that my rushed, imperfect placement had actually made them look more realistic. The slight imperfections in positioning made the tiny Triceratops look like it was actually moving through chocolate soil. My mistakes had given the dinosaurs personality and life that my carefully planned perfection never could have achieved. I looked at the security guard who was waiting patiently for me to gather my things. "Sir, I understand you have to follow protocol, but could I have just 5 more minutes? I think I figured out how to make these cupcakes special, and there's a little boy waiting for his birthday surprise." Something in my voice must have convinced him because he nodded and stepped back. "5 minutes. But if Ms. Henderson doesn't confirm your authorization by then, I'll have to ask you to leave." I worked faster than I'd ever worked in my life, placing dinosaurs on cupcakes with deliberate imperfection. Instead of trying to make everything look polished and professional, I focused on making each cupcake tell a story. The pterodactyl looked like it was landing on its cupcake. The Tyrannosaurus rex appeared to be emerging from chocolate soil, tiny candy fossils scattered around its feet. By the time the security guard's radio crackled with Jessica's voice confirming my authorization, I had 12 of the most realistic dinosaur cupcakes I'd ever created. They weren't perfect, but they were alive with personality and imagination. More importantly, I'd learned something crucial about my own creative process. I'd been so focused on making everything flawless that I'd forgotten the joy and spontaneity that had drawn me to baking in the first place. Tyler didn't want perfect cupcakes. He wanted cupcakes made with love by his Uncle Graham, mistakes and all. I packed the finished cupcakes carefully into transport containers, thanked the security guard for his patience, and headed for my truck. Tyler's party had started an hour ago, and I was still late. But for the first time all morning I felt hopeful about what I was bringing to the celebration. I drove toward Madison's house with my heart pounding, practicing apologies in my head while trying not to think about what might be happening at the party. Through my truck's windows I could see other families enjoying their Saturday afternoon, kids playing in yards, parents washing cars, the kind of peaceful suburban scene that made Cedar Falls feel safe and predictable. But as I pulled into Madison's driveway, I could hear chaos from the backyard. Children's voices were crying and complaining, and I caught snippets of Madison's strained voice trying to manage some kind of crisis. The cupcake containers felt suddenly heavy in my hands as I walked around the side of the house toward the back gate. The scene in the backyard was worse than I'd imagined. Tyler was sitting on the porch steps, his face red and streaked with tears, while Madison knelt beside him, trying to offer comfort. Half the party guests had already left based on the abandoned paper plates and untouched party favors scattered across the picnic tables. The remaining children seemed restless and disappointed their parents, checking phones and making polite conversation that barely concealed their eagerness to leave. Uncle Graham. Tyler spotted me first, but instead of the excitement I'd expected, his face crumpled into fresh tears. "You said you'd bring dinosaur cupcakes. Everyone kept asking where they were, and Mom said you were just late, but I knew you forgot about me." The words hit me like physical blows. I set the cupcake containers on the nearest picnic table and knelt down to Tyler's eye level, but he turned away from me, burying his face against Madison's shoulder. "Tyler, sweetheart, look what Uncle Graham brought," Madison said gently, though I could see the strain in her eyes. She'd been covering for me, making excuses to increasingly skeptical parents, and her patience was wearing thin. But Tyler shook his head stubbornly. "They're too late. Everyone already knows I was lying about the special cupcakes. Jeremy said his dad makes better cakes anyway, and Kayla said her mom would never be late to her party." Madison stood up and pulled me aside, her voice low and tight with frustration. "Graham, do you have any idea what you've put me through today? I've been explaining to these parents for an hour why my brother, the supposedly professional baker, couldn't manage to show up on time with cupcakes for a child's birthday party. I tried to explain about Derek's betrayal and the equipment theft, but Madison cut me off with a gesture that reminded me uncomfortably of our father's impatience. "This isn't just about today, Graham. This is about you promising things you can't deliver. Again. Do you know how many times I've had to explain your choices to Mom and Dad? How many times I've told them you're finally getting your act together, only to have something like this happen?" Her words stung because they were true. Our parents, Robert and Linda, had been asking pointed questions about my career changes and financial stability since the divorce. Madison had been my defender, insisting that I just needed time to find my path. Now I'd made her look like a fool for believing in me. "Dad called this morning to ask how your business was going." Madison continued, her voice rising, despite her effort to keep the conversation private. "I told him you were catering Tyler's party as a showcase for potential clients. 3 of these parents were considering hiring you for their own events. How do I explain this?" I looked around the backyard at the remaining parents who were making polite conversation, while clearly wondering what kind of family drama they'd stumbled into. Mrs. Patterson from Tyler's school was here, along with the Jenkins family from down the street, and Helen Summers, whose daughter was in Tyler's class. These weren't strangers. They were members of our community who would remember this embarrassment. "Tyler," I said, walking back toward the porch steps, "I know I'm late, and I know you're upset with me, but could you please look at what I brought before you decide I don't care about you?" Tyler peeked over Madison's shoulder, his curiosity finally overcoming his hurt feelings. I opened the first cupcake container and carefully lifted out the Tyrannosaurus Rex cupcake, holding it where he could see the detailed features and realistic positioning. Tyler's eyes widened. He forgot to be angry as he stared at the tiny dinosaur emerging from chocolate soil, complete with textured skin and fierce expression. "Uncle Graham, how did you make it look so real?" The other children crowded around, their boredom forgotten as they examined each cupcake. The tiny pterodactyl looked like it was actually flying. The triceratops appeared to be grazing on chocolate grass. Each dinosaur had its own personality and story. "These are incredible," said Helen Summers, taking photos with her phone. "Tyler, your uncle is amazingly talented. How long did these take to make?" But before I could answer, I heard a commotion from the front of the house. A car door slammed and someone was shouting my name with drunken belligerence. My blood went cold as I recognized Derek's voice. "Graham, get out here, you lying piece of garbage." Derek stumbled into the backyard, clearly intoxicated and furious. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who'd been drinking since early morning. The parents immediately moved protectively closer to their children, while Madison stepped forward with the kind of maternal authority that made her an excellent elementary school teacher. "Sir, this is a private party for children," she said firmly. "You need to leave immediately." Derek ignored her, focusing his rage on me. "Graham owes me money, $4,000 for equipment and business loans. He's been telling people I stole from him, but he's the one who defaulted on our partnership agreement." The parents exchanged worried glances, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation happening in front of their children. Tyler moved closer to Madison, frightened by Derek's aggressive tone and unpredictable behavior. "Derek, you're drunk," I said as calmly as possible. "This isn't the time or place for this conversation. There are children here." "Don't tell me about time and place," Derek shouted, swaying slightly on his feet. You've been bad-mouthing me all over town telling people I'm a thief, but I have documentation proving you're the deadbeat who couldn't pay his share of business expenses. He pulled a crumpled folder from his back pocket and waved it around, claiming it contained evidence of my financial irresponsibility. Some of the parents were starting to gather their children, clearly wanting to remove them from what was becoming an ugly situation. That's when Jessica appeared at the back gate. She'd finished her business presentation and come looking for me, probably to make sure the cupcakes had been successfully delivered. But instead of a celebration, she'd walked into a confrontation that threatened to destroy not just Tyler's party, but my reputation in the community. "Derek Williamson," she said in the crisp, professional voice I remembered from our marriage. "I've been looking for you." Derek turned toward her confusion, replacing some of the drunken anger. "Who are you supposed to be?" "I'm Jessica Henderson, forensic accountant for Richardson and Associates," she said, pulling an official-looking folder from her briefcase. "I've been investigating your business practices on behalf of several defrauded partners, including Graham Hartley." The backyard fell silent except for Derek's heavy breathing and the distant sound of traffic from Main Street. Even Tyler stopped sniffling, sensing that something important was happening among the adults. Jessica opened her folder and began reading in a clear, authoritative voice. "Derek Williamson has defaulted on business loans with 3 different partners in the past 5 years. His pattern involves forming partnerships with skilled tradespeople, taking out loans using their credit and equipment as collateral, then liquidating assets to cover gambling debts." Derek's face went white. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can." Jessica handed him a document. "These are copies of complaints filed against you in Hamilton County and Polk County. You're currently wanted for questioning in 2 cases of business fraud. Graham wasn't your first victim, Derek. He was just your most recent." The parents were staring now, realizing they were witnessing something much more serious than a business dispute. Helen Summers had quietly moved to the far side of the yard with her daughter, while the Jenkins family was edging toward the gate. "This is harassment," Derek said, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. He looked around the backyard, seeming to realize for the first time that he was confronting me at a child's birthday party in front of multiple witnesses. "No," said Tyler suddenly, his small voice cutting through the tension. "This is my birthday party, and you're scaring everybody." The simplicity of Tyler's statement somehow defused the situation more effectively than any adult intervention could have. Derek looked down at Tyler, then at the frightened faces of the other children, and some of the fight went out of him. "I just want what's mine," he said quietly. "What's yours is a criminal record and a reputation for fraud," Jessica replied. "What's Graham's is the business he built with his own creativity and hard work. You stole his equipment, Derek. You embezzled money from their business account. And now you're disturbing a child's birthday party because you can't accept responsibility for your own choices." Derek stared at the documents in Jessica's folder, then at me, then at the cupcakes I'd managed to create despite his sabotage. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He looked like a man who'd run out of places to hide from his mistakes. But then Tyler walked over to me and slipped his small hand into mine. "Uncle Graham, are these really the dinosaur cupcakes you made just for me?" I squeezed his hand gently. "They really are, buddy. I promised you dinosaur cupcakes, and I always keep my promises to you." Tyler smiled up at me, his earlier hurt forgotten in the excitement of finally seeing his special birthday treat. "They're the most beautiful cupcakes in the whole world." Standing there in Madison's backyard, surrounded by the chaos Derek had created, I realized something important had changed inside me. For months, I'd been letting Derek intimidate me, accepting his version of events and doubting my own judgment. But watching him try to ruin a child's birthday party made me understand that some people aren't worth trying to appease. "Derek," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "you need to leave now. This is Tyler's special day, and you're not going to ruin it with your problems." Derek looked like he wanted to argue, but Jessica's documentation and the disapproval of the watching parents seemed to deflate his remaining bravado. He mumbled something about lawyers and walked unsteadily back toward the front of the house. As his car pulled away from the curb, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. Not just because the confrontation was over, but because I'd finally stopped running from the truth about Derek's character and my own worth. After Derek's dramatic exit, the party atmosphere slowly began to recover. The remaining children crowded around the picnic table where I'd arranged Tyler's dinosaur cupcakes, their earlier disappointment forgotten in favor of examining each tiny prehistoric creature. Tyler appointed himself as tour guide, explaining the difference between herbivores and carnivores to his impressed classmates. "This one is a velociraptor," Tyler announced, pointing to a cupcake topped with a small, fierce-looking dinosaur. "Uncle Graham made it look like it's hunting for prey in the chocolate dirt." Helen Summers approached me while the children were distracted by the cupcakes. She was an elegant woman in her 40s who owned 3 successful coffee shops in Cedar Falls and the neighboring towns. I'd seen her at community events but had never spoken with her directly. "Graham, I have to tell you, these cupcakes are extraordinary," she said, examining the intricate fondant work. "The level of detail and artistry is beyond anything I've seen from local bakers. I've been looking for a specialty dessert provider for my coffee shop, someone who could create signature items that would set us apart from chain competitors." I felt a flutter of hope, but tried to manage my expectations. "That's very kind of you to say, Mrs. Summers. I appreciate the feedback. Please call me Helen. And I'm not just being polite. I've been in the food service business for 15 years, and I know quality when I see it. These cupcakes could command premium prices in the right market." She paused, glancing toward where Jessica was helping Madison serve juice boxes to the children. "Though I understand you're dealing with some business complications right now." I explained briefly about Derek's fraud and the dissolution of Artisan Sweets, trying to present the facts without sounding like I was making excuses. Helen listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to evaluating business propositions. "I have a proposal for you," she said when I finished. "I've been renovating the kitchen space in my flagship location downtown. It's larger than I need for basic coffee shop operations, and I've been considering renting out space to local food entrepreneurs. If you're interested, we could discuss a partnership arrangement. You'd have access to professional kitchen facilities in exchange for creating exclusive dessert items for my shops." Before I could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Madison looked toward the front of the house with a concerned expression, probably worried that Derek had returned. But instead of Derek's angry voice, we heard Tyler's excited shout, "Grandma, Grandpa, come see my dinosaur cupcakes." My parents, Robert and Linda, appeared at the back gate carrying wrapped presents and apologetic smiles. Dad was still wearing his golf clothes from the country club, while Mom had her usual elegant appearance that made every family gathering feel slightly formal. "Sorry we're late, sweetheart," Mom said, kissing Tyler's forehead. "Grandpa's golf game ran longer than expected." Dad surveyed the backyard scene with his practiced eye for social dynamics. As a retired bank president, he'd spent decades reading situations and people, and I could see him processing the lingering tension from Derek's confrontation. "Graham," he said with characteristic directness, "Madison mentioned you were showcasing your bakery business at Tyler's party. I'd like to see what you've been working on." Tyler grabbed Dad's hand and dragged him toward the cupcake display, chattering excitedly about each dinosaur's species and characteristics. I watched my father's expression change from polite interest to genuine surprise as he examined the detailed fondant work. "These are remarkable," Dad said, looking at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes since before my divorce. "Respect. The craftsmanship is professional quality. You created all of these yourself." I nodded, feeling unexpectedly nervous about his approval. "Each dinosaur is hand-sculpted from vanilla fondant, then painted with edible food coloring. The cupcakes are chocolate with salted caramel filling." Dad picked up the Tyrannosaurus Rex cupcake, turning it to examine the realistic texture and detailed features. "This is far more sophisticated than I expected. You've clearly developed genuine skill in this field." The compliment meant more than I wanted to admit. Dad had been skeptical about my career changes, particularly my decision to leave accounting for what he considered hobby work. Having him acknowledge my abilities felt like validation I'd been seeking for months. But the moment was interrupted by a commotion near the back gate. Derek had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. He'd brought two men I didn't recognize, both wearing work clothes and looking uncomfortable about being at a children's party. "Those are the guys who helped me move the equipment," Derek announced loudly, pointing at me. "They can testify that Graham knew about the debt collection. He was there when we loaded everything into the truck." The two men looked around the backyard awkwardly, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into a family situation they wanted no part of. The shorter one, who couldn't have been older than 20, kept glancing toward the children with obvious discomfort. "Derek, we just helped you move some bakery stuff," the taller man said. "We don't know anything about business debts or whatever this is about." Jessica stepped forward with her folder of documentation, her professional demeanor unchanged despite Derek's persistence. "Gentlemen, you may want to be aware that you've been assisting in the transportation of stolen property. Mr. Williamson has outstanding warrants for business fraud in 2 counties. Derek's face flushed red. "Those warrants are bogus. Graham owes me money and I have every right to reclaim collateral for unpaid debts." "Actually, you don't," said Dad in the calm, authoritative voice he'd perfected during 40 years of banking. "I've been listening to this conversation, and I'm curious about something, Derek. You claim Graham defaulted on business loan payments, but loan agreements require documentation. Where's your copy of the signed partnership agreement?" Derek fumbled in his pockets, pulling out the crumpled folder he'd waved around earlier, but when he opened it, instead of legal documents, it contained cocktail napkins with handwritten notes and what appeared to be betting slips from the casino in neighboring Riverside County. The watching parents exchanged glances as Derek's credibility crumbled in real time. Even his 2 companions were backing away, clearly wanting to distance themselves from whatever legal trouble Derek was creating. "Derek," I said, finding my voice stronger than I'd expected. "You've stolen my equipment, emptied our business account, and now you're disrupting my nephew's birthday party with false accusations. In front of my family, my community, and these children. Don't you think it's time to accept responsibility for your choices?" Derek stared at me with something like shock. For months, he'd been able to intimidate me with his aggressive personality and confident lies. But standing in Madison's backyard, surrounded by people who cared about me, I realized I didn't have to accept his version of reality anymore. "You want to know the truth," Derek said desperately. "Graham was just as eager to take shortcuts as I was. He knew I was using creative financing to get our equipment. He didn't ask questions because he didn't want to know the answers." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Some of the parents looked uncertain, wondering if there might be validity to Derek's claims. Tyler moved closer to Madison, sensing the adult tension even if he didn't understand the specifics. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would define how this story ended. Derek's right about one thing. I didn't ask enough questions about our business arrangements. I trusted him because I wanted to believe I could have a successful partnership without doing the hard work of due diligence and financial oversight. Dad nodded approvingly at my admission, while Jessica looked surprised by my willingness to accept partial responsibility. But I continued, looking directly at Derek. "My naive trust doesn't excuse your deliberate fraud. You stole from me, Derek. You stole from our business account, and you put my name on loan documents without my knowledge or consent. Those are crimes regardless of my poor judgment in trusting you." Helen Summers stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "I think we've heard enough. Derek, you have 2 choices. You can leave this property immediately and deal with your legal problems through appropriate channels, or I can call my friend Detective Morrison and have you arrested for disturbing the peace and harassment." Derek looked around the backyard one more time, seeing his complete lack of support among the gathered witnesses. His two companions had already started walking back toward the front of the house, clearly wanting to escape before law enforcement arrived. "This isn't over," Derek muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. He shuffled after his departing associates, leaving behind only the lingering smell of alcohol and disappointment. As Derek's car pulled away for the second time, Tyler broke the silence with perfect 6-year-old logic. "Uncle Graham, can we eat the dinosaur cupcakes now? All this talking is making me hungry." The laughter that followed felt like a release of tension that had been building for months. Tyler's birthday party was finally able to proceed as intended, with children enjoying their prehistoric treats while parents shared conversation and coffee that Madison had prepared. I found myself standing next to Jessica as we watched Tyler distribute cupcakes to his friends. She'd been remarkably supportive throughout the confrontation, despite having no obligation to defend me against Derek's accusations. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for everything today. The kitchen, the documentation about Derek standing up for me in front of everyone. You didn't have to do any of that." Jessica smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. "Graham, I need to tell you something. When I offered to help you this morning, it wasn't just about Tyler's cupcakes. I've been thinking about calling you for weeks." She explained that her company was expanding operations in Cedar Falls, and they needed a local office manager for their new branch. More importantly, she'd been reconsidering her own priorities since the divorce, realizing that her obsession with career advancement had cost her relationships that mattered. "I'm not suggesting we try to recreate our marriage," she said carefully. "Too much has happened, and we're both different people now. But I've learned things about myself through baking classes and therapy. Maybe we could explore being business partners instead of trying to be romantic partners." The possibility intrigued me more than I wanted to admit. Jessica's business acumen and my creative skills had always complemented each other well. Our marriage had failed partly because we'd tried to merge our entire lives instead of appreciating our different strengths. "What kind of business partnership?" I asked. Jessica gestured toward the cupcakes Tyler's friends were enthusiastically devouring. "Something like this. You handle the creative side, developing recipes and managing production. I handle operations, marketing, and financial planning. We build something together based on mutual respect instead of romantic expectations." Before I could respond, Helen Summers rejoined our conversation with the focused energy of someone ready to make things happen. "I've been thinking about timing," she said. "My kitchen renovation will be complete in 2 weeks. If you're serious about partnering with Jessica, we could arrange a trial period. You'd have access to professional facilities, a built-in customer base through my coffee shops, and the support structure of an established business." I looked around Madison's backyard, taking in the scene Derek's disruptions had failed to destroy. Tyler was showing his dinosaur cupcakes to his grandparents, explaining each species with the enthusiasm only children can maintain. Madison was laughing with the other parents, no longer embarrassed by her brother's situation. Dad was examining the empty cupcake containers, clearly impressed by the professional presentation. For the first time in months, I could envision a future that didn't involve constant anxiety about failure and disappointment. Standing there surrounded by family and community support, I realized that Derek's betrayal might have been the best thing that could have happened to my business ambitions. "Yes," I said, looking at both Jessica and Helen. "Let's try this partnership. But I have one condition: Tyler gets to be our official taste tester for any new dinosaur-themed products." Tyler's delighted cheer from across the yard suggested he approved of the arrangement. 2 weeks later, I stood in the newly renovated kitchen space behind Helen's flagship coffee shop, watching Jessica arrange our business incorporation papers on the stainless steel counter. We'd decided to call our partnership Sweet Foundations, representing both our baking focus and the solid business structure we were determined to build this time. The kitchen was everything Helen had promised: professional-grade ovens, adequate refrigeration space, and enough room for both production and teaching the baking classes Helen had suggested as additional revenue. More importantly, it felt like a space where I could be creative without constantly worrying about equipment failure or surprise expenses. Tyler had become our most enthusiastic supporter, visiting after school to help package cupcakes and test new flavor combinations. His current favorite was something he'd named Archaeologist's Chocolate, a rich cocoa cupcake with vanilla fossil-shaped candies hidden inside the frosting. Madison had started bringing her teacher friends by the shop, and our customer base was growing through word-of-mouth recommendations. But I wasn't prepared for what happened that Tuesday afternoon when the food blogger arrived unannounced. Sarah Chen from Midwest Eats magazine walked into the coffee shop while I was preparing a batch of spring-themed cupcakes for a baby shower order. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her late 20s, with an energy that suggested she was genuinely passionate about discovering local food talent. "Are you Graham Hartley?" she asked, pulling out a digital recorder and notebook. "I've been hearing amazing things about your dinosaur cupcake technique from parents all over Cedar Falls. I'm working on an article about innovative small-town bakers who are bringing artisan quality to everyday celebrations." I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Media attention was exciting, but it also felt like exposure to judgment and potential failure. What if Sarah's article brought more orders than we could handle? What if customers expected perfection I couldn't consistently deliver? "I'd love to feature your work in our regional spotlight section," Sarah continued. "But I have to be honest with you, Graham. I'm also investigating a story about business fraud in the food service industry. Your name came up in connection with Derek Williamson's activities." My stomach dropped. Even though Derek was facing criminal charges, the association with his fraud case could destroy my reputation before Sweet Foundations really got started. Food bloggers had significant influence in small communities like Cedar Falls, and a negative article could end my business before it began. "I want to be clear," Sarah said quickly, apparently reading my expression. "You're not under investigation. From what I've learned, you were victimized by Derek's scheme, just like several other local food entrepreneurs. I'm hoping you might be willing to share your experience to help other small business owners recognize similar warning signs." Jessica appeared from the coffee shop's front area, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. She introduced herself as my business partner and offered to provide documentation about Derek's fraudulent activities. "We believe Derek targeted creative professionals who were focused on their craft rather than financial oversight," Jessica explained, spreading out bank records and loan documents on the counter. "Graham lost approximately $8,000 in equipment and business capital, but more importantly, Derek nearly destroyed his confidence in his own abilities." Sarah took notes while examining Jessica's documentation. "This fits the pattern I've been tracking. Derek has defrauded at least 12 small food businesses across 3 counties over the past 4 years. Always the same method: target skilled tradespeople, gain their trust through partnership agreements, then liquidate assets to cover gambling debts." The revelation that Derek had victimized so many others felt simultaneously validating and disturbing. I hadn't been uniquely gullible. I'd been targeted by someone who specialized in exploiting people's dreams and ambitions. "Would you be willing to go on record about your experience?" Sarah asked. "Your story could help other entrepreneurs avoid similar situations. And honestly, the way you've rebuilt your business after Derek's betrayal is exactly the kind of resilient story our readers love." I looked at Jessica, who nodded encouragingly. Speaking publicly about Derek's fraud felt risky, but it also felt like an opportunity to reclaim control of my narrative. Instead of being known as the baker who'd failed to show up for his nephew's party, I could be known as someone who'd overcome adversity and built something better. "Yes," I said. "If it helps other people avoid what I went through, I'll share my story." Sarah spent the next hour interviewing me about Derek's deception, the equipment theft, and the process of rebuilding with Jessica's support. She photographed several of my cupcake designs and sampled the archaeologist's chocolate that Tyler had helped develop. But the most important part of the interview came when Sarah asked about my goals for Sweet Foundations. "I'm not trying to become the next celebrity baker." I explained decorating a cupcake while we talked. "I want to create desserts that make people happy, build a sustainable business that supports my family, and maybe teach other people that it's possible to start over after failure." Sarah smiled as she wrote down my response. That's exactly the kind of story our readers connect with. Authentic passion for craft combined with genuine care for community. The article should be published next month. After Sarah left, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the potential publicity. Jessica assured me that positive media coverage would help establish our credibility, especially given the professional way we'd handled the interview. You sounded confident and articulate, she said, cleaning flour from the counter while I finished the baby shower cupcakes. Nothing like the anxious person who almost skipped Tyler's birthday party 6 months ago. She was right. Somewhere between confronting Derek and building sweet foundations, I developed the ability to speak about my work without constantly second-guessing myself. I still felt nervous about new challenges, but the anxiety no longer paralyzed me. That evening, Tyler visited the shop with Madison to help package cupcakes for the next day's orders. He'd developed his own quality control system, carefully examining each cupcake to ensure the decorative elements were properly positioned. "Uncle Graham," he said thoughtfully while arranging cupcakes in delivery boxes, "do you think Derek feels sad about being mean to everybody?" The question caught me off guard. In all my anger about Derek's betrayal, I'd rarely considered his emotional state beyond vindictive satisfaction that he was facing legal consequences. "I think Derek made choices that hurt a lot of people," I said carefully. "Sometimes when people make bad choices, they feel sad about the consequences, but that doesn't undo the harm they caused." Tyler nodded seriously. "Like when I broke Madison's favorite mug because I was mad about bedtime. I felt sad after, but the mug was still broken." The simplicity of Tyler's analogy made me realize I'd been carrying more anger about Derek's betrayal than necessary. Derek's choices had consequences he'd have to live with, but continuing to focus on his failures was preventing me from fully appreciating the success Jessica and I were building together. 2 days later, everything changed again. A representative from Midwest grocery chain called the shop explaining that they'd heard about our cupcake designs through industry contacts. They were launching a new line of premium bakery products and wanted to discuss purchasing our recipes for mass production. The offer was financially tempting, $50,000 up front for exclusive rights to our dinosaur cupcake designs, plus royalties on future sales. For a business that was barely 2 months old, it represented immediate financial security and validation of our creative work. But it also meant giving up control of the artistic elements that made our cupcakes special. Mass production would require simplified designs and cheaper ingredients, turning Tyler's beloved dinosaurs into generic grocery store products. Jessica and I spent hours discussing the pros and cons. The money would allow us to expand our operations, hire employees, and build financial stability faster than organic growth would permit. But accepting the offer would fundamentally change the nature of what we were trying to create. "What does your gut tell you?" Jessica asked as we closed the shop that Thursday evening. I thought about Tyler's excitement when he'd first seen the realistic dinosaur cupcakes, about the pride in Madison's voice when she introduced me to her friends as her celebrity baker brother, about Helen's enthusiasm for supporting local entrepreneurs through her coffee shop partnership. "My gut tells me that some things are more valuable than money," I said. "We're building something that matters to our community. Selling out to a grocery chain would make us successful by some measures, but it wouldn't make us proud of our work." Jessica smiled, and I realized she'd been hoping I'd reach that conclusion. I was thinking the same thing. We can build something bigger and better by staying true to our original vision. It might take longer, but it will be authentically ours. The next morning, I called Midwest grocery chain and politely declined their offer. Instead of feeling disappointed, I felt relieved and energized. We were choosing to build sweet foundations based on our values rather than external validation or quick financial gains. That afternoon, Tyler helped me design our newest creation, cupcakes that looked like tiny gardens with edible flowers and candy vegetables. They were intended for a spring festival booth, but Tyler insisted they also needed to be available year-round for people who wanted happy cupcakes that looked like hope. Standing in our kitchen, working alongside Tyler while Jessica managed customer orders in the front shop, I realized that turning down the grocery chain offer had been the moment I'd truly committed to building something meaningful rather than just profitable. 3 months after declining the grocery chain offer, Sweet Foundations had become an integral part of Cedar Falls's community fabric. Our cupcakes were featured at every major local event, from school fundraisers to wedding receptions, and Jessica's business classes had attracted aspiring entrepreneurs from 3 neighboring towns. I was working on a particularly complex order for the high school's graduation celebration when Helen burst through the kitchen's back door with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Graham, you need to see this," she said, waving her tablet in the air. "Sarah Chen's article about you went viral on social media. We've gotten 47 online orders since this morning, including 3 wedding cake consultations and a request from someone in Chicago who wants to drive here specifically for dinosaur cupcakes." I wiped fondant from my hands and looked at Helen's screen. The Midwest Eats article featured a large photo of Tyler examining one of my cupcakes with the headline, "From Fraud Victim to Community Baker: How Graham Hartley Built Sweet Success on Authentic Foundations." The article had been shared hundreds of times across Facebook and Instagram, with comments from people praising both the cupcake artistry and the story of overcoming Derek's betrayal. "This is incredible publicity," Jessica said, reading over my shoulder. "But we need to be realistic about capacity. We can't fulfill 47 special orders without compromising quality or burning ourselves out." She was right as usual. Success brought its own challenges, particularly the temptation to accept every opportunity without considering long-term sustainability. We'd learned from Derek's mistakes about prioritizing quick gains over careful planning. "What if we hired help?" Helen suggested. "I know several culinary students from the community college who are looking for practical experience. You could train them in your techniques while managing larger production volumes." The idea of teaching others my cupcake methods felt both exciting and terrifying. What if I couldn't effectively communicate the skills I'd developed through trial and error? What if expanding too quickly led to quality problems that damaged our reputation? But before I could voice these concerns, Tyler arrived for his after-school visit with news that put everything in perspective. "Uncle Graham," he called, bursting through the front door with Madison close behind. "Mrs. Patterson wants you to make cupcakes for the whole school. She said they're doing a special assembly about local heroes, and you're going to be one of the speakers." Madison explained that Tyler's elementary school was organizing a career day focused on entrepreneurs who'd overcome challenges to build successful businesses. The principal had heard about my story through the magazine article and wanted me to speak to students about persistence and creative problem-solving. "They want you to bring cupcakes for 300 kids, Madison said with a grin. "Think you can handle that kind of order?" Looking at Tyler's excited face, I realized this was exactly the kind of opportunity that made all our hard work worthwhile. These weren't customers looking for premium desserts. They were children who would remember the day someone showed them that dreams could become reality through determination and community support. "We'll make it work," I said, already mentally planning production schedules and ingredient requirements. Tyler wanted to help me design special school-themed cupcakes. That evening, Jessica and I stayed late to prepare for the school order while discussing our staffing needs. We'd decided to hire 2 part-time employees, Maria Santos, a culinary arts student with excellent decorating skills, and James Mitchell, a recent high school graduate who needed work experience before starting college. "I keep thinking about something Tyler said last week," I told Jessica as we measured ingredients for the next day's production. "He asked me if making cupcakes was my forever job, and I realized I don't think about work that way anymore. This doesn't feel like a job. It feels like my contribution to the community." Jessica smiled while organizing order forms. "That's the difference between what we're building now and what you had with Derek. Derek saw your skills as a way to make money quickly. We see them as a way to create something meaningful that happens to also be profitable." Our conversation was interrupted by knocking at the shop's front door. Through the glass, I could see a familiar silhouette that made my stomach clench: Derek. He looked different than he had at Tyler's birthday party months earlier. Thinner, more sober, wearing clean clothes and carrying what appeared to be a folder of documents. When I unlocked the door, he didn't try to push his way inside or start shouting accusations. "Graham, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," he said quietly, "but I need to talk to you. 5 minutes, please." Jessica positioned herself protectively near the counter where she could reach the phone if Derek became aggressive, but his demeanor seemed genuinely different, lacking the desperate belligerence I'd come to associate with his behavior. "I've been in rehab," Derek explained, remaining near the door instead of inviting himself further into the shop. "Court-ordered treatment for gambling addiction. Part of the program involves making amends to people I've harmed. I know I can't undo what I did to you, but I want you to understand what happened and why." He opened his folder and pulled out financial statements that documented his gambling losses over a 2-year period. The numbers were staggering. Derek had lost over $60,000 at casinos and online betting sites using business loans and equipment sales to fund his addiction. "I targeted people like you because you were focused on creative work instead of financial oversight," he admitted. "I knew you'd trust me to handle the business side while you concentrated on baking. I convinced myself I was helping you by taking care of details you didn't want to manage." Jessica examined Derek's documentation while I processed the emotional impact of his confession. Part of me felt vindicated to have confirmation that Derek had deliberately exploited my trust. But another part felt sad for the destruction his addiction had caused in multiple people's lives. "Derek, I appreciate you coming here to explain," I said carefully. "But I need to ask, what do you want from me? Forgiveness, permission to feel better about what you did?" Derek shook his head. "I want to help you recover what I stole. I can't pay back the money immediately, but I'm working with a counselor to develop a restitution plan. More importantly, I have information about your equipment that might be useful." He explained that some of my specialized baking tools had been sold to a restaurant supply company in Des Moines, rather than individual buyers. If I could prove ownership, there was a possibility of recovering items that hadn't been resold to other customers. "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica asked suspiciously. "What's your motivation for helping Graham now?" Derek was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because I have to live with what I did. Not just the legal consequences, but knowing that I nearly destroyed something good that Graham was building. I can't fix that completely, but maybe I can help him understand it wasn't his fault." The admission hit me unexpectedly hard. For months, I'd been carrying guilt about being naive enough to trust Derek, wondering if I should have recognized warning signs or asked better questions about our business arrangements. Hearing Derek acknowledge that he'd deliberately deceived me felt like permission to stop blaming myself for his choices. "Thank you for telling me this," I said finally. "I'll contact the supply company about recovering my equipment. But Derek, I need you to understand something. Sweet Foundations is built on different principles than Artisan Sweets was. Jessica and I have transparency documented agreements and shared decision-making. We learned from what happened with you." Derek nodded, accepting the implicit message that he wasn't welcome to be part of our new venture. "I hope you build something amazing, Graham. You deserved a better partner than I was capable of being." After Derek left Jessica and I spent the rest of the evening processing the conversation and its implications. His apology didn't erase the damage he'd caused, but it provided closure that allowed us to move forward without constantly looking over our shoulders. "How do you feel about seeing him again?" Jessica asked as we locked up the shop. I considered the question while turning off the kitchen lights. "Relieved, I think. For months, I've been wondering if I'd misjudged Derek or missed obvious signs of his problems. Tonight confirmed that he was deliberately deceptive. That makes it easier to trust my judgment going forward." 2 weeks later, I stood in front of 300 elementary school students holding a perfectly decorated cupcake shaped like a miniature schoolhouse. Tyler was in the front row, beaming with pride as he watched his Uncle Graham explain how persistence and community support had helped build Sweet Foundations. "Sometimes when we fail at something, it feels like the end of the story," I told the students. "But failure is often just the beginning of a better chapter. The most important thing is to learn from mistakes, ask for help when you need it, and never stop trying to create something that makes other people happy. A little girl in the third row raised her hand. "Mr. Graham, do you still feel sad about the mean man who stole your bakery stuff?" I smiled, thinking about Derek's recent visit and the equipment I'd successfully recovered from the restaurant supply company. I feel sad that he made choices that hurt people, including himself. But I don't feel angry anymore because his mistakes led me to build something better with people who share my values. After the presentation, Tyler helped me distribute cupcakes to his classmates, while Madison and Jessica managed the logistics of serving 300 children. Watching Tyler explain cupcake decorating techniques to his friends, I realized that our business had become something larger than either Jessica or I had initially envisioned. We weren't just selling desserts. We were modeling the possibility of rebuilding after failure, the importance of choosing trustworthy partners, and the satisfaction of creating something that brought joy to others. Tyler had become our unofficial ambassador, sharing our story with the enthusiasm only children can maintain. That evening, as we cleaned up after the school event, Helen approached me with another opportunity that would test our commitment to sustainable growth. "A food television show wants to feature Sweet Foundations," she announced, showing me an email from a producer at the Cooking Network. "They're doing a series about small-town bakeries, and Sarah Chen's article brought you to their attention. It would be filmed here in the shop, featuring your cupcake techniques and the story about rebuilding after Derek's betrayal." The opportunity was exciting, but also overwhelming. Television exposure could bring national attention to our business, potentially leading to opportunities we'd never imagined. But it could also attract more orders than we could fulfill and pressure to expand faster than our values would allow. Jessica and I looked at each other, both thinking about the grocery chain offer we'd declined months earlier. We'd learned to evaluate opportunities based on alignment with our goals rather than immediate benefits or external validation. "What do you think, Tyler?" I asked my honorary business consultant. "Should Sweet Foundations be on television?" Tyler considered the question with typical 6-year-old seriousness. "Only if they promise to tell the true story about how you kept your promise to make my dinosaur cupcakes even when the mean man tried to stop you." His response reminded me why we'd built Sweet Foundations in the first place, to create something authentic that brought happiness to people we cared about. Television exposure might be wonderful, but only if it supported rather than compromised those core values. 6 months later, I stood in the expanded Sweet Foundations kitchen, watching Maria Santos teach a group of middle school students how to create buttercream flowers, while James Mitchell managed a steady stream of customers in the front shop. The Cooking Network feature had aired 3 weeks earlier, bringing exactly the kind of positive attention Tyler had hoped for, national recognition that stayed true to our authentic story. The television producers had been respectful of our values, focusing on the community impact of Sweet Foundations rather than treating us as a novelty act. They'd interviewed Tyler about his role as chief taste tester, filmed Madison describing how my business had strengthened our family bonds, and given Jessica credit for the operational expertise that made our partnership successful. Most importantly, they'd presented Derek's fraud as a cautionary tale rather than sensationalizing the drama. The segment had helped other small business owners recognize warning signs of predatory partnerships, fulfilling my original hope that sharing my story could prevent others from experiencing similar betrayal. The national exposure had brought opportunities we'd carefully evaluated against our sustainability goals. Food Network magazine wanted to feature our recipes in a holiday issue. A publisher had approached us about writing a cookbook combining cupcake designs with stories about overcoming business challenges. 3 culinary schools had invited me to guest lecture about entrepreneurship and creative risk-taking. We'd accepted the opportunities that aligned with our mission of education and community support, while declining those that would have required compromising our hands-on personal approach to customer relationships. Sweet Foundations had grown, but it had grown intentionally. Tyler, now 7 years old and officially in 2nd grade, had become our most effective marketing ambassador. His friends regularly brought their parents to the shop, requesting cupcakes designed around their current interests, soccer balls for teammates, book characters for reading enthusiasts, science themes for budding inventors. Uncle Graham. Tyler said that Saturday morning while helping me prepare cupcakes for the town's autumn festival. Mrs. Patterson says you're famous now because of the television show. Does that mean you're too important to make my birthday cupcakes next month? I laughed, remembering the anxiety I'd felt preparing for his 6th birthday party. The difference between that terrified version of myself and the confident business owner I'd become felt like measuring the distance between planets. Tyler, making your birthday cupcakes is the most important job I have all year, I assured him. What theme are you thinking about this time? Tyler's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm I'd come to associate with his most ambitious ideas. Space dinosaurs. Like, what if dinosaurs lived on other planets and had to wear space helmets and fly rocket ships? The concept was wonderfully ridiculous and perfectly Tyler. I could already envision fondant brontosauruses wearing tiny astronaut helmets, cupcakes decorated to look like alien planets, maybe even edible rocket fuel made from popping candy. Space dinosaurs it is, I agreed. But this time I'm starting preparations 2 weeks early. No last-minute emergencies. Jessica joined our conversation while organizing order forms for the Autumn Festival booth. She'd recently been promoted to regional manager for her company's expanding Cedar Falls operations, but she still spent mornings at Sweet Foundations managing our business operations before heading to her corporate office. Our partnership had evolved into something neither of us had expected when we'd started working together in that hotel kitchen. We weren't trying to recreate our marriage, but we'd developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared goals that felt more stable than our romantic relationship had ever been. I have news about Derek, Jessica said, setting down her tablet. His restitution payments came through again this month. At the current rate, he'll have fully repaid the equipment value within 2 years. Derek's commitment to making amends had been surprisingly consistent. He'd been working 2 jobs since completing his rehabilitation program, sending monthly payments along with brief updates about his progress in gambling addiction recovery. We'd had no personal contact since his visit months earlier, but his financial accountability had helped restore my faith in the possibility of genuine redemption. I've been thinking about setting up a small business loan fund with Derek's restitution money, I said, watching Tyler carefully place candy decorations on festival cupcakes. Something to help other people who've been defrauded by bad partners rebuild their businesses. Jessica smiled approvingly. That would be a meaningful way to turn Derek's mistakes into something constructive. We could partner with the community college's business program to identify recipients. The idea had been developing in my mind for weeks, inspired partly by Tyler's innocent questions about whether Derek felt sad about hurting people. Creating opportunities for other entrepreneurs wouldn't undo Derek's damage, but it would transform that negative experience into something that strengthened our community. Madison arrived with Craig and my parents for their weekly visit to the shop. Dad had become one of our most enthusiastic supporters, regularly bringing his golf buddies by to sample new flavors and bragging about his son's television appearance. Mom had started an informal cupcake club among her friends, ordering themed treats for their book discussions and garden society meetings. Graham. I saw Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store yesterday. Mom said, admiring Tyler's decorating work. She told me the elementary school wants to make cupcake decorating a regular part of their art curriculum. They're hoping you might consider teaching a monthly workshop. The request appealed to me more than any television opportunity or corporate partnership could. Working with children connected directly to why I'd started baking in the first place, the joy of creating something that made people happy. Tyler's friends had been visiting the shop regularly, and I'd noticed how the creative process engaged even kids who struggled with traditional academic subjects. I'd love to do that, I said immediately. Tyler could be my assistant instructor. Tyler beamed at the prospect of helping teach his classmates. Over the past year, he'd developed genuine skill in basic decorating techniques, and his enthusiasm for explaining procedures made him a natural educator. This keeps getting better, said Helen, arriving with the afternoon's coffee shop orders. I just got off the phone with the mayor's office. They want Sweet Foundations to coordinate desserts for the winter tourism campaign. Apparently, that television feature has been driving visitors from neighboring states, and they want to capitalize on our recognition. The tourism opportunity represented exactly the kind of community partnership we'd hoped to develop. Instead of expanding beyond Cedar Falls, we could help bring economic activity to our town while maintaining the personal relationships that made our work meaningful. As the afternoon progressed and we prepared for the evening's festival setup, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 2 years ago, I'd been a divorced, unemployed former accountant with no clear direction and diminishing confidence in my ability to succeed at anything. Derek's betrayal had initially felt like confirmation of my worst fears about myself. But surviving his fraud and rebuilding with Jessica's partnership had taught me that failure wasn't a permanent condition. It was simply information that could guide better decisions going forward. The most important lesson had come from Tyler's birthday party crisis. Standing outside Madison's house that day, watching my nephew cry through the window, I'd realized that keeping promises to people we love matters more than appearing successful to people we don't know. Everything else, all the business success and community recognition, had grown from that foundational understanding. "Uncle Graham," Tyler said as we loaded festival cupcakes into transport containers. "Are you happy about how everything worked out?" I looked around the kitchen where Maria was teaching decorating techniques to visiting students, where James was efficiently managing customer orders, where Jessica was planning our next community outreach program. Through the front windows, I could see Helen's coffee shop customers enjoying their afternoon treats, many of them neighbors who'd become friends through our shared investment in Cedar Falls' economic vitality. "I'm more than happy, buddy," I told Tyler. "I'm grateful. Sometimes the worst days of our lives lead us to the best parts of ourselves." Tyler nodded seriously, then grinned with typical 7-year-old resilience. "Does that mean Derek accidentally did something good by being mean?" The question made me pause. Derek's actions had been destructive and selfish, causing real harm that couldn't be dismissed as accidentally beneficial. But surviving his betrayal had forced me to develop strengths I might never have discovered. Otherwise, the ability to ask for help, the courage to stand up for myself, and the wisdom to choose partners based on character rather than convenience. "Derek made bad choices that hurt a lot of people," I said carefully. "But sometimes when bad things happen, we can choose to learn from them and build something better. That's what we did with Sweet Foundations." Tyler accepted this explanation with the philosophical flexibility of childhood, then immediately refocused on the important business of ensuring our festival cupcakes were properly secured for transport. That evening, as Tyler helped me arrange our booth at the Autumn Festival, I watched families throughout Cedar Falls enjoying the kind of community celebration that made small-town life meaningful. Children ran between booths with cotton candy and caramel apples, while parents caught up with neighbors and local business owners showcased their crafts and services. Sweet Foundations had become part of this fabric, contributing to the shared experiences that bound our community together. Tyler's friends approached our booth with the confidence of regular customers, pointing out their favorite cupcake designs to visiting relatives and explaining the stories behind each creation. "Mr. Graham," said Emma Jenkins, Tyler's classmate, whose family lived down the street from Madison, "my mom wants to know if you can make wedding cupcakes that look like her flowers. She's getting married again next spring." I assured Emma that we could create cupcakes matching any botanical theme, then watched her skip away to report the good news to her mother. These interactions multiplied across hundreds of customers, and community events represented the real measure of our success, the degree to which our work enhanced other people's celebrations and milestones. Later that evening, after we'd sold every festival cupcake and Tyler had fallen asleep in the passenger seat of my truck, I drove slowly through Cedar Falls' quiet downtown streets. The Marriott, where Jessica and I had frantically baked Tyler's birthday cupcakes, was lit up for a weekend conference. Murphy's hardware store, above which I'd lived during those uncertain months after my divorce, showed warm light in the windows of families who'd moved into the apartments I'd once called home. Everything looked the same, but my relationship to these familiar places had been transformed by 2 years of gradual growth and deliberate relationship building. I was no longer the anxious outsider wondering if he belonged in his hometown. I'd become someone whose work contributed to the community's vitality and whose presence was valued by neighbors and friends. Pulling into Madison's driveway to transfer sleepy Tyler to his own bed, I realized that the cupcakes had never really been about the cupcakes. They'd been about proving to myself and others that I could make commitments and keep them, that I could build something meaningful from creativity and persistence, and that asking for help was a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. Tyler's original request for dinosaur cupcakes had seemed like such a small thing, a 6-year-old's birthday wish that should have been easy to fulfill, but honoring that promise had required me to overcome Derek's sabotage. Accept Jessica's assistance, confront my own fears about failure, and commit to building something authentic rather than impressive. Standing in Madison's driveway looking at the house where Tyler would wake up tomorrow morning, excited about helping plan his space dinosaur birthday cupcakes, I understood that success wasn't about achieving some predetermined goal. It was about becoming the kind of person who could be trusted with other people's hopes and celebrations. Sweet Foundations would continue growing, bringing new opportunities and challenges that I couldn't yet imagine. Tyler would develop new interests that would inspire creative cupcake designs. Jessica and I would navigate the complexities of business partnership with the wisdom we'd gained from our previous relationship. Derek would continue his restitution payments and recovery work, hopefully finding his own path toward redemption. But regardless of what changes lay ahead, I'd learned the most important lesson Tyler's birthday party could teach. Showing up for the people we love, especially when circumstances make it difficult, is the foundation of everything else that matters. The cupcakes were just cupcakes. The love and commitment they represented was everything. What challenges have you overcome that initially seemed like disasters but ultimately led you to something better? I'd love to hear your stories of rebuilding and resilience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel for more real-life stories of triumph over adversity, and sharing it with someone who might need encouragement about their own fresh start. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes our worst moments are just the beginning of our best chapters. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of showing up for the people who matter most.